The airport was crowded with travelers rushing toward their gates, but nobody noticed the woman sitting alone on a cold metal bench with a pale little girl sleeping against her shoulder. Her husband had just walked away with their luggage, leaving them with nothing but a small handbag, a medical folder, and a boarding pass he had deliberately made useless. What he did not know was that the woman he had abandoned was not a helpless wife with no money and no future. She was the secret owner of one of the largest airlines in the world. And before that day was over, the same airport where he left her would become the place where his entire life changed forever. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of never giving up on someone who is struggling, please like this video, comment your thoughts, share this story with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to Wisdom Story House. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories like this to you. The woman was named Marisol, 38 years old, elegant even after a sleepless night, with dark chestnut hair tied loosely behind her neck and tired green eyes that had forgotten what peaceful sleep felt like. Beside her was her 8-year-old daughter, Celeste, a fragile child who had spent most of her life fighting a serious heart condition. Celeste's small hand rested against her mother's coat while a medical monitor inside Marisol's bag blinked quietly. They were supposed to be flying to a private medical center overseas for a treatment that could give Celeste a chance at a normal childhood. Instead, Marisol had just watched her husband, Garrick Sloan, disappear through the airport crowd. Garrick had spent years complaining that Celeste's illness had ruined their marriage. He blamed hospital visits, expensive treatments, cancelled vacations, and sleepless nights on the little girl who had never asked to be sick. Marisol had protected Celeste from most of his cruelty, telling herself that stress had changed him and that perhaps one day he would remember the man she had married. But Garrick had become colder every month. He stopped asking about Celeste's condition. He stopped attending appointments. Eventually, he began sleeping in another room and secretly moving money from their shared accounts. What Garrick never understood was that Marisol had deliberately hidden her wealth. Years before meeting him, she had inherited her father's aviation company, which had eventually grown into Vera Skies, a global airline empire worth billions. She had placed the company into a private family trust and lived quietly because she wanted to know whether people loved her for herself rather than for her fortune. Garrick had always believed she was simply a modest woman who had inherited a comfortable amount of money from distant relatives. He had no idea that the airline whose planes he proudly flew on business trips belonged to the woman he constantly criticized. Marisol had never used her wealth to control Garrick. She paid the medical bills, kept their home comfortable, and quietly funded charities for children with heart conditions. But when Celeste became seriously ill, Marisol's entire world narrowed to one goal: keeping her daughter alive. That morning, Garrick had told them he would help them board the flight. Instead, after reaching the airport, he took their large suitcase, handed Marisol a small envelope containing a few $100s, and claimed he had an urgent business meeting. He told her that he could no longer live like this and that she needed to accept that their marriage was over. Then he walked away. Marisol initially thought he would come back. 5 minutes passed, then 15, then 30. Celeste woke up and looked around sleepily, asking where her father was. Marisol swallowed her tears and told her that he had gone ahead to arrange something. She could not bring herself to tell her daughter that her father had abandoned them. Celeste smiled weakly and asked whether they were still going to see the doctors who might make her heart stronger. Marisol hugged her tightly and promised they would. But inside, fear was spreading through her chest. The airline's private medical flight had been delayed because of a technical inspection, and Garrick had taken the only commercial booking documents with him. Marisol could have solved the problem with one phone call. She could have called the airline's executive office, revealed her identity, and had an aircraft waiting within an hour. But she hesitated. She wanted to know whether Garrick had truly abandoned them or whether this was some terrible misunderstanding. She wanted to believe that the man she had loved for 12 years could not simply walk away from his sick daughter. Then her phone vibrated. It was a message from her chief executive officer, Nia Corvin, informing her that Garrick had contacted a lawyer and had apparently begun proceedings to separate himself from the family. He had also attempted to access a company account. Marisol stared at the message in disbelief. Her hands began to tremble. Suddenly, everything became clear. He had not abandoned them because he was overwhelmed. He had abandoned them because he believed Marisol was powerless. Celeste suddenly coughed and pressed a hand against her chest. Marisol immediately forgot everything else. She called the airport medical team, and within minutes, paramedics rushed toward them. Passengers turned to watch as Celeste was carefully placed onto a medical stretcher. Marisol followed beside her daughter, holding her hand and whispering words of encouragement. The airport physician recognized the seriousness of Celeste's condition and told Marisol that the child needed specialist care immediately. That was when Marisol finally made the call she had been avoiding. She called Naya. Within seconds, the calm voice of the airline's CEO changed the atmosphere around them. Naya contacted the airport operations director, who immediately came to the medical area. Then the airport security chief arrived. Within minutes, executives were quietly moving through the terminal, following instructions from the one person whose identity had remained hidden from almost everyone. Marisol Vera had arrived. The owner of the airline was standing in a simple gray coat beside her sick daughter. No cameras were allowed near them, and no announcement was made. Marisol did not want attention. She wanted her daughter treated. A private aircraft was prepared on the nearest runway. The flight crew had been informed that the passenger was the airline owner's daughter, but Marisol asked them to treat Celeste like any other child who needed help. As Celeste was transported toward the aircraft, Marisol looked through the terminal glass. And there stood Garrick. He had returned, but he was no longer walking away. He was standing beside a businessman in an expensive suit, staring toward the aircraft with a confused expression. Garrick had apparently returned because he had discovered that his planned financial arrangements had failed. He had expected Marisol to panic, beg him to come back, and perhaps surrender part of the money he believed she possessed. Instead, he saw executives surrounding her. He saw the airline's security team. He saw the private aircraft waiting on the runway. Then he saw Naya approach Marisol and quietly address her as the owner of Vera Skies. Garrick's face went completely pale. The man beside him asked what was happening. Garrick could not answer. He suddenly understood that the woman he had left sitting alone with their sick daughter was the owner of the very company whose aircraft was waiting to carry that child to safety. He hurried toward Marisol, but security stopped him. Marisol looked at him through the glass. For a moment, the airport noise seemed to disappear. She remembered their wedding day. She remembered holding newborn Celeste. She remembered Garrick promising that he would never leave them. And she remembered the cold bench where he had abandoned them only hours earlier. Her eyes filled with tears, but she did not look angry. She looked disappointed. That was somehow worse. Garrick tried to explain himself, but Marisol refused to let another argument steal precious time from her daughter. She simply told security that he was not to approach Celeste or interfere with her treatment. Then she boarded the aircraft. The flight lifted into the clear afternoon sky, carrying Marisol and Celeste toward the specialists who might save her daughter's life. For the first time in years, Marisol allowed herself to stop pretending everything was fine. She cried, not because she had lost Garrick, but because she finally understood that she had been grieving a marriage that had ended long before the airport. Celeste survived the procedure. Weeks later, the doctors said her condition had improved dramatically. She still needed treatment, but for the first time, they spoke about school, sports, friends, and a future. Marisol returned home with her daughter and began rebuilding their lives. She did not use her billions to destroy Garrick. She simply allowed the legal system to handle their separation. She refused revenge because she did not want Celeste to grow up believing that pain had to create more pain. Garrick eventually lost everything he had tried to secure through deception. His business relationships disappeared, his reputation collapsed, and the people who had encouraged him to abandon his family stopped answering his calls. Months later, he sent Marisol a letter. He apologized. He admitted that he had been selfish and that he had mistaken Celeste's illness for an inconvenience instead of understanding that she was a child who needed her father. Marisol read the letter quietly. She did not hate him. But forgiveness did not mean returning to him. She wrote back only once, telling him that Celeste deserved a father who would love her without conditions. If he truly wanted forgiveness, he needed to become that man, not for Marisol, not for money, and not for his reputation, but for the daughter he had once walked away from. Years later, Celeste stood beside her mother at a Vera Skies charity event. She was healthy enough to run, laugh, and dream about becoming a pilot. Marisol watched her daughter look toward the aircraft outside the window, and tears filled her eyes. The same airport that had once witnessed their abandonment had become the place where their new life began. Marisol learned that day that sometimes losing someone is not the end of your story. Sometimes it is the moment you finally discover who you are without them. And Celeste learned something even more important: your worth is never decided by the person who chooses to leave you. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to Wisdom Story House. Your support means more than you know and helps these stories reach people who may need a little hope today. Special request. Before you leave, comment, kindness always wins, if you believe that a person's true wealth is measured not by money, but by the love and kindness they give to others. Because Marisol owned a billion-dollar airline, but the greatest thing she ever possessed was not an empire, a private aircraft, or a fortune. It was the courage to hold her daughter's hand when the person who promised to stay had walked away. And sometimes, the most powerful comeback begins on the very bench where someone thought they had left you with nothing.